Storm and Flame, written by Mallory Wanless, narrated by Laura Greaves. Chapter 1. Elena. "Come on, just work, damn it," Elena muttered to herself, trying for the millionth time to cast her spell. Aegon had stretched his lithe, weasel-like body across a long, skinny patch of sunlight on the floor of the testing room. He'd spent the morning basking in the warmth of the sun-drenched stone and flicking his fluffy blue-black tail back and forth. As her closest, and arguably only friend, Aegon knew nothing he could say would make her feel better. She was in a mood, and the best thing he could do was to leave her be. Sparks flared and quickly sputtered out from Elena's fingertips. "Damn it! Why can't I get this stupid spell right?" It was a rhetorical question, but Elena was so frustrated by her own ineptitude that she would have traded everything she owned to successfully complete a spell on the first try. Elena was easily the worst enchantress in her class, probably the whole school. The other students mocked her mercilessly. It didn't help that her mother, Madame Labelle, was the most famous enchantress in the whole country, possibly the world, and the headmistress of their school. She could turn a seed into a centuries-old tree with the flick of her wrist. Elena could grow a seed into a sapling with 20 minutes of chanting, flicking, waving and praying. Maybe, on a good day. Madame Labelle was notorious for her skills with magic as much as her beauty. Unfortunately for Elena, she inherited her looks from her father. At least, she assumed that's where she got her flat hair and dull brown eyes. She'd never actually met him. In Waverley, as far as enchantresses were concerned, men served one purpose: impregnating women. The men were used and released of all parental rights, whether they liked it or not. Most men didn't even know the woman they had lain with was an enchantress, much less that they had fathered a child as a result. The women opted to disguise themselves: bar wenches, visitors lost in the big city, damsels in need of aid on the side of the road, etc., just to get what they needed and be gone before the man even knew her name. It was crass and cowardly, but Elena had been raised to believe it was for the best. Men weren't capable of raising children, especially magical ones, and an enchantress always gave birth to another enchantress. Never in the history of the world had an enchantress given birth to a non-magical child, or a boy for that matter. Enchantress beget enchantress. End of story. Elena dreamed of love and happy endings when she was younger. All the girls did, but their time at Harbour Ridge taught them that magic was their top priority, followed closely by their loyalty to the school and Madame Labelle. Elena always felt that it was a tad hypocritical how often her mother preached about loyalty to their family, the school and their classmates, when she never paid any attention to her own flesh and blood. What sort of mother neglects her own child to favour those who are more adept at magic? Not a good one, Elena mused glumly. Aegon had been with her since before she was born, like all familiars. They were born together and stayed attached for an unusually long time, according to her mother. Typically, familiars disconnected from the baby's umbilical cord within a few days before settling into their permanent animal form. Aegon and Elena stayed connected for 2 weeks. All the while Aegon remained a blob encased in the placenta. Her mother had many specialists, including a therionology enchantress or an animal enchantress, come and inspect Aegon and try to coax him into taking any form at all. Nothing worked. Baby Elena just spent her days cuddling this disgusting blob of goo and sleeping. Madame Labelle often liked to remind Elena of how unusual that was, and how that should have been a sign that her daughter was going to be different, and not in a good way. Aegon did eventually develop into an animal. However, he didn't change into anything anyone had ever seen before. When she was young, Elena overheard one of the scholars reminiscing with another about how they'd managed to identify Aegon as a Raju. Madame Labelle had tasked all of the scholars in the Therionology department to scour all the history books and tomes to identify him. Aegon was the only known Raju in ages, and Madame Labelle hated it. Rajus were blue-furred, weasel-like creatures that had lightning abilities. Another frustrating hiccup as far as Madame Labelle was concerned. Familiars weren't supposed to have magic of their own. They were just meant to be guides to help the enchantress learn to control her powers. Elena knew they were unique, and she knew that her mother despised her for it. Not only did she look nothing like her gorgeous and flawless mother, but she was as inept at magic as she was clumsy. Not to mention her familiar was a troublesome weasel with issues controlling magic he shouldn't have even had. Elena tried very hard in her lessons to improve her control and help Aegon to control himself, but it never seemed good enough. Harbour Ridge was set back in the heart of the aptly named Dark Woods. According to legend, the school was originally built as a safe harbour for magical beings who were being hunted and persecuted throughout the country. The King of Waverley took pity on the enchantress and gave them the land along the mountain ridge to build a sanctuary. Thus, Harbour Ridge was created, a shelter for all enchantresses on the ridge of a mountain to train, educate, and live without fear. The school itself was an ominous castle made of black obsidian, the stones so dark you could almost feel it sucking the light from the sky. 4 immense towers stood at the cardinal points and served as the dormitories for the girls. 4 girls to a room, 4 rooms to a floor, 4 floors to a tower. There was magic in the number and the balance it created. Without that balance, things would come to a grinding halt, according to school rumour. The legend said that one year, a girl in the North Tower couldn't handle the pressure and jumped from her window. The instant her heart stopped beating, the whole northern tower started to tilt and pull away from the castle. According to the stories, the headmistress at the time had to admit some less desirable girl from the nearest village just to keep the school from literally falling apart. Elena never fully believed the legend, simply because she could never see her mother admitting any student unless they had impeccable credentials and at least 10 relatives who were once prolific students at Harbour Ridge, on top of passing the incredibly strenuous entrance exam. She truly believed that her mother wouldn't have admitted her if that had been an option. However, it would have been disastrous for the daughter of the headmistress to not go to Harbour Ridge, too much of a scandal for her mother to bear. This was a day unlike any other. It marked Elena's 16th birthday, a very special birthday. At Harbour Ridge, an enchantress's 16th birthday was the day she took her speciality test to determine which division of magic she would be best suited for. The test was always different, based on the enchantress, the season, the time of day, even her lunar cycle. There would be no way to prepare, because there would be no way to know what your test would be. When Elena had walked into her testing hall earlier that morning, she was surprised to see that the room was utterly empty. No alchemy supplies, no seeds meant for her to grow into beautiful trees, no fire or water to highlight her elemental skills. Nothing, not even a table or chairs. Aegon had been nestled around her neck, his preferred spot, and he too was awkwardly quiet. There should have been someone in the room. The tests were always different, but there was always someone there to administer them. "Maybe we're just early, Aegon," she had whispered as she'd crept into the middle of the room, further into the empty expanse. The room was eerily still. It felt like a violation to be there, much less making any noise above a hushed tone. "Maybe they forgot," Aegon replied, in an equally quiet, albeit more condescending voice. She could feel the nervousness coursing through his veins, both as his heart pounded around her neck and through the magic that bound them. Standing in the middle of the empty room, she had decided to wait. It was supposed to be her big day, and it was impossible to think her mother simply forgot. Elena convinced herself that waiting was merely a part of the test, assessing her patience and perseverance. She would stay put until someone showed up to evaluate her skills and place her in a speciality. This was her day, damn it. She'd spent the day watching the sun pass through the windows, from one side of the room, up and over to the other side, repeatedly trying and failing to accomplish even the simplest of spells. Maybe she'd finally get that damned spell right before someone arrived to test her. "It's been hours," Aegon whined. "Can we please just go find someone? Your mother. I'm sure she'll have a good reason for all this. I'm bored and I want a snack." "Familiars don't need food or sleep to survive, Aegon. You know that." Elena was bored too, but she was far too stubborn to give up now. She estimated that they were about an hour from sunset, meaning everyone was sitting down to supper in the Great Hall. They'd forgotten about her. She had waited all day, and her own mother had forgotten about her birthday. The biggest birthday that an enchantress ever had at Harbour Ridge. The only one that muxing mattered. And her damned mother had forgotten her. Elena realised that this shouldn't be so surprising. Her mother never paid much attention to her before, so why would this change anything? "I didn't say I need to eat, only that I want a snack. I'm feeling peckish." Aegon was lounging in the last rays of sunlight on the floor a few feet from where she sat. He was, of course, not really peckish at all, but he could feel how hungry she was, and he was hoping to motivate her to feed herself. Aegon was a very attentive familiar, always making sure she took care of herself, even when she didn't want to. She was certain that he would go and fetch her food himself if he could venture more than 20 paces from her. That was the thing about being magically tethered. There was an unseeable force that physically kept them together. There were rumours that the wizards and enchantresses of old could travel miles apart from their familiars, but they were just rumours. No enchantress could really do that. They'd die. You cannot be separated from your soul. "I know what you're doing," Elena muttered, shifting in her seated position on the floor. "Fine. We'll wait 5 more minutes. Then we'll go find her and see what sort of excuse she musters. Let's swing by the kitchens first and grab a quick snack. I can feel your stomach rumbling through the stone in the floors. This is what you get for skipping breakfast." Aegon played the part of the fretful parent with practiced ease. Elena truly believed he had happily jumped into the maternal role hours after her birth, when it had been clear her own mother wouldn't. She suspected that was about 30 seconds after Madame Labelle realised just how different her daughter and Aegon were. Madame Labelle hated when things were out of sorts, and everything about the two of them was subpar in her eyes. "Will that make you happy? If we stop and grab a roll, will you please shut up about food for a while?" "Absolutely." He was already on his feet and getting a running start so he could jump onto her shoulders and settle back onto his perch. "You're a very frustrating creature, you know that," she mumbled as he landed perfectly, the result of years of practice, and snuggled her ear. His way of saying, "Yes, but you love me anyway." And she did. He was the only one who ever bothered to make sure she was okay, and he went to great lengths to help her find happiness in this dreadful place. The trip to the headmistress's office was an uneventful one, with only a quick pit stop for a couple of dinner rolls in the kitchen before rushing up the 4 flights of stairs to reach her mother's tower. Much to her surprise, the door was wide open and her mother was waiting for her. Sitting behind her imposing ebony desk, her mother looked almost regal, especially with her familiar, a snowy lion named Zed, lazing to her right. "Elena, please come in. Shut the door." It wasn't a request. Nothing ever was with Madame Labelle. She was cold and distant, but that was her way with Elena. "Today was meant to be your testing day. You failed. Unfortunately, you've been expelled from Harbour Ridge and must leave immediately." Elena didn't move. She just stood there as if someone had cast a spell and frozen her in place. How? What are you saying?" she stammered. and she stumbled to the closest chair. "You never showed for your evaluation. That is unacceptable. You have until the morning to pack your things and leave. If you are still here at first light, you will be forcibly removed." No sooner had she finished the words did she go back to the paperwork on her desk. Madame Labelle, her mother, had evicted her from the only home she'd ever known, and she hadn't even batted an eye. "How can you do this to me? I'm your muxing daughter. I waited all day in that room. No one ever showed up to test me. I waited." Rage flowing through her veins like molten lava, lighting a fire within her. Aegon jumped down from her neck and onto her mother's desk, small blue sparks flicking off the end of his tail as he swished it back and forth. "You will not use that sort of foul language in my presence. Get control of your familiar, child. You are my daughter. That is the only reason you have lasted this long. You don't belong here. We both know it. It's time for you to go." While her mother never moved, Zed rose slowly and powerfully to his feet, sending the message, "Go now, or there will be painful consequences." "I can't believe you're doing this. I mean, I knew you were disappointed in me, but I never thought you hated me. How can you be so heartless?" Elena knew if they remained in this room, it was very likely that there would be blood. She just wasn't sure whose. But she needed answers. She deserved answers. "What did I do that justifies expelling me from my home? Don't give me that nonsense about how I didn't show up. I was there at dawn." "I am under no obligation to explain myself to you, child. You've only survived this long because you carry my blood. We both know you don't belong here." Her mother's tone was cool, distant, bored even. Bored? She's imploding my entire life, and she's muxing bored. Sparks flashed off the tip of Aegon's tail, and he stood on her mother's stack of papers, forcing her attention to them rather than the work she clearly felt was more important than her flesh and blood. "What did I ever do to make you hate me this much?" Elena's voice was a hushed, heartbroken whisper. All of her rage had instantly drained from her body. For a split second, she thought she saw a flash of guilt on her mother's face, but it disappeared in a blink of an eye, replaced by her practiced enchantress mask, cool detachment. Madame Labelle gestured to Aegon. "You must learn to control your familiar." She rose from her throne-like chair and turned her back on her daughter. "You will be gone by first light. If you cause a scene, the guards will remove you by force." Elena snatched Aegon off the headmistress's desk and stormed out, leaving the only family she'd known in her wake. Elena threw herself onto her bed, curled up around her down feather pillow, and cried. Aegon wiggled under her arms and tried his best to comfort her, rubbing his velvety blue nose against her cheek and licking her tears away. "How could she? Why? I just don't understand." She choked out the words once her eyes had run out of tears. "How can she be so callous? And what about the girls? The tower will be out of balance and surely start to crumble as soon as I leave, won't it? That's what the legend and rumours all say." "I don't know, Elle, but I imagine her holier-than-thou-ness will have found a way to maintain the balance. She's too calculating to do something like this without a foolproof plan." Aegon wiped the last of her tears away with his fluffy tail. "I must be missing something. I was told to report to the exam room this morning, at first light. We were there. We waited all day and no one came to test me. We were there." Elena sighed, devastation weighing on her like a thick blanket, making it nearly impossible for her to take a deep breath. It just didn't make sense. It was unlike her mother to be so unreasonable. She had always had exceedingly high expectations for Elena, and Elena had never felt like she could truly reach her mother's goals for her. But expulsion? Why would Madame Labelle make up an excuse to expel her only child, then promptly evict her like it was nothing? Like Elena was nothing, just some failed enchantress who couldn't be taught and must therefore be amputated like a gangrenous limb, for fear that she might infect the others. How serious do you think she was about having us forcibly removed at first light? Aegon questioned gently. Knowing her, very. Madame Labelle never makes empty threats, Elena grumbled. Slowly, she sat up in her bed. I don't know how to pack our stuff. It's not like we've travelled a lot before. Maybe we can stuff it all into the pillowcase? As she went through her wardrobe, Elena tried to ignore the reality of her situation. She packed her few belongings into her pillowcase, a few dresses, a spare pair of boots, and a woolen coat, made her bed one last time, and walked out of her room. Elena was grateful that the other girls were still at dinner. No one had ever been expelled before. No one even knew that was possible. She didn't know how to explain what had happened. They passed through the kitchens and filled the pillowcase with as much as they could, said a quick goodbye to the cooks, and left. With Aegon perched atop her left shoulder, Elena hiked the pillowcase on her right and started down the path, away from the school, into the dark woods and the unknown.